uh, I feel so lucky to have been put into a position where I could see this. And you guys are the first people to see this. And you've got the opportunity to make this happen. You have to get the word out.
Welcome to Alchemical Science. I'm Jordan, an open source researcher who has, for the last few months, been covering the advent of a very new and simultaneously very old form of technology. In this video, I'm going to try and cater for everyone. If you're new to this, welcome to a video you probably didn't expect. I hope this will bring you up to speed and you'll find it both enjoyable and enlightening. If you're an old hand, don't worry, this isn't just a recap of old information. We'll be delving into the new, significant findings of the last week and a bit and breaking down what it all means in the second half of the video. I think a quick recap is valuable for everyone at this point. So this has been a really big week for everyone who's been following the development of Bob Granier's research on ball lightning or plasmoids formed via bubble cavitation, and his analysis and testing of Malcolm Bendel's thunderstorm generator, Dr. Bingwei Huang's fusion reactors, and other cavitation systems working on similar principles. We'll talk a bit about this and reference some of these other systems a little bit later in the video too. So Bob's recent findings, which he presented unfiltered, spread over several live streams and videos on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project YouTube channel last week, they're really serious findings. The potential implications for nearly every field of science and for every human on Earth are absolutely profound. There's no other way to put it. This isn't a drill. I'm not exaggerating for effect. This has actually been quite an emotional week if you've been following all of this. A quick pause to offer thanks to everyone who's been sharing and liking the videos, and particularly a very special thank you to those who donated to the channel. It's really not easy to work open source, and it's directly thanks to you guys that I have time to spend on this video today. And remember that Bob and MFMP also work in the open source domain, and you can find their donation links in the description of any of their videos. So these type of projects are for the community and they're funded by the community, and that's the way that things stay out in the open. So thank you guys. So what are we going to cover in this video? First, I will give you a brief and easy to understand overview for the newcomers or those who just got a little bit lost on the way, what the technology actually is, what it does, and what the processes behind it are. So we'll introduce some of the researchers, the inventors, and the other main players who've been involved in the collective research around plasmoids or ball lightning, and how these phenomena can be reproduced and harnessed using various synthetic systems, including, of course, the thunderstorm generator, which has been my own passion project for a while now, and that was my introduction to Bob's work too, and many of these other researchers and systems, when I just kind of found out this was way bigger than just the thunderstorm generator, although that is a very special system on its own. So this should set the scene nicely and get everyone up to speed. So in the second part of the video, we're going to break down Bob Granier's recent earth-shattering findings and explain what they mean for science, for history, for reality, and for the thunderstorm generator and other cavitation systems. So there's a fair bit to cover. This is like a lot of the pieces of the puzzle for decades of research suddenly just coming together in a huge implosion. And as I've mentioned already, the implications are far-ranging. They go far beyond what most of us have probably been considering or expecting so far, or maybe we have been expecting it. Again, I'm going to be sticking to layman's terms and keeping my language as simple as possible. As usual, Bob's announced his findings in all their technical glory over on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project YouTube channel already, and I encourage anyone who has experience in chemistry, physics, or other related fields to go and watch the original videos, particularly anyone who has experience with the scanning electron microscope and that type of laboratory work. So the value I aim to bring to the table with my videos is just in their simplicity, their broad accessibility to alternative-minded scientists, home experimenters, and the generally curious public. So it's important to me that the world moves together on this technology. With that in mind, we need your help. Once you've got your head around this, if you're seeing what we're seeing here, and you understand how important it is, please share this information as widely as you can. So let's get into it. What is this old new technology? What is it doing? What are the processes behind it? We're going to start with the basics here and just build up to the most recent findings, tell the full story. So essentially this technology itself, no matter which system we're discussing, is all about water bubble cavitation. So in simple terms, this means forming a bubble in water with a few specific requirements and then collapsing this bubble. So we want to do this because when bubbles are collapsed or imploded under just the right conditions, what Dr. Matsumoto termed electronuclear collapse, they produce an unusual phenomena. We call this phenomena a plasmoid, or a charge cluster, ball lightning, or an exotic vacuum object. So essentially the bubble, when collapsed symmetrically into this toroidal geometry, produces a homeostatic fractal ball of lightning that does not immediately dissipate, and which can actually feed on anything surrounding it, taking in surrounding gases like hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide, and even denser matter like carbon, iron, and other heavier elements, ripping them apart at an atomic level and harvesting them as energy. So any deconstructed excess energy to the requirements of the plasmoid is ejected in the form of free protons and electrons, which then quickly reform and synthesize as new elements. So this process of stepwise synthesis or transmutation has a signature pattern, which Bob has clearly identified and outlined in his new findings, but we'll get to this soon. So the reason why they're sometimes referred to as charge clusters is because ball lightning is fractal in nature. Smaller homeostatic structures collect together to form larger homeostatic structures, and this is all occurring fractally on multiple levels. So Bob often refers to this as a wheel within a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, a phrase I've also used to describe this concept in the past, and this is actually from a Bible verse. These phenomena are also found to be naturally occurring, and a sighting of ball lightning whizzing through the sky or flying out of a power line or an electronic device seen as a child has been the inspiration for many researchers' later interest and careers in this field of study. I've certainly spoken to many. So after they're formed, the toroidal plasma structures are then employed in subsequent phases of the system to instigate further reactions. So for example, in the thunderstorm generator, the primary focus so far has been on the transmutation of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrocarbons from the exhaust waste stream of the internal combustion engine and coal power plants generators into oxygen, nitrogen, or other more suitable elements in this context using no additional energy input. So this gives us a mechanism with which we can essentially control all pollution caused by the burning of any carbon-based fuel source, and also a way to remediate degraded environment, land, air, and sea almost effortlessly, considering we already use combustion engines for nearly everything. And there's also some increased fuel efficiency in the engine due to the plasma structures being both a charged fuel source themselves and a catalyst for the synthesis of other combustible elements, like increased ratios of hydrogen and oxygen that can go into the engine. So various other cavitation systems, some of which I mentioned earlier, are producing these same ball lightning structures, which are leaving behind the same highly cohesive pattern of geometric and chemical signatures. The goal of most of these systems has been primarily to just be able to observe and study these formations and reactions and explore how they can be reliably reproduced on a small scale. But in the case of the thunderstorm generator, it's actually in the pre-production prototyping phase already, with the eventual goal of being mass-produced and rolled out on scale to solve a number of practical global issues. And this is kind of updating every week, getting it much more serious. So to summarize, the various instances of the technology, including the thunderstorm generator and Dr. Bin Zhuan Huang's reactors, the systems we will be primarily focusing on in this video, they're all used to produce tiny water bubbles, which are then imploded under specific conditions to form homeostatic fractal charge clusters, which we call plasmoids or ball lightning. And these plasma structures are then used as a catalyst for further reactions, which can transmute one element to another element. And they can also act as a fuel source themselves. So there are various other processes behind the overall results obtained by specific systems. The thunderstorm generator, for example, creates extreme hydrodynamic shear in the next stage of the system by polarizing two opposing hot and cold, expanding and contracting counterclockwise and clockwise vortexes, much like the Runge-Hilsch vortex tube, which you all may have heard of by now. So this appears to amplify the results that can be achieved with such a system dramatically. And it takes advantage of much the same process that's involved in the generation and formation of plasmoids themselves, just on a larger scale simultaneously. So this is where we need to introduce the story of Bob Grainger and Malcolm Bendall. So Malcolm Bendall is the inventor of the thunderstorm generator. He's developed his own model of physics called the plasmoid unification model, built on direct observations of natural phenomena. He works with the likes of Nikola Tesla, Martin Fleischmann, Ken Shoulders, and incorporating the work of some modern names like Randall Carlson, Marco Rodin, and some much more ancient names and texts too. But in this model, he explains the nature of physical reality through considerations of geometry, resonance, and numbers, natural form and function. It's a unification model. His model is expansive and it serves as the framework within which he designed the thunderstorm generator and some of his other future technology. So I'm a serious student of Malcolm's theory, and you can find numerous videos on the channel about plasmoid unification model and the thunderstorm generator. So go and check out those after this one if you'd like to learn more about that. And if you want to find more about Malcolm himself or get access to his open source notes, you can visit his website, strikefoundation.earth, or soon to be strikefoundation.org, I believe. And you can also find Malcolm's lecture series on HowTube, which Randall Carlson assisted him with. All right, the other name I mentioned, Bob Grainger, is an open source volunteer researcher at the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, a group of independent scientists who are carrying on the work and legacy of Mr. Fleischmann, who was a British electrochemist and a cold fusion researcher who unfortunately passed away in poor health and without really seeing mainstream acceptance of his work in 2012. So Malcolm Bendall spent a week with Martin Fleischmann in his later years as well, discussing cold fusion, and promised him to help finish his work. So Martin's research has been a common inspiration for both Bob and Malcolm. But going back to Bob himself, he's been involved in this research for at least the last decade. He was one of those guys I mentioned that saw naturally occurring ball lightning when he was younger and just couldn't shake the curiosity until he eventually devoted his life and career to solving the mystery. So Bob's been involved in numerous experiments studying cavitation and ball lightning over his decade with MFMP, such as his work on the supernova reactor, the Ultra experiments, Neil Crichton Gold's Lion reactor, Hank Urian's Vega experiments, Malcolm's thunderstorm generator, and of course his work with Dr. Bin Juan Huang and their colleagues on their fusion reactors in Taiwan. And their recently published peer-reviewed paper in the journal Nature on the same, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But these projects only really constitute the tip of the iceberg of Bob's knowledge and experience. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of current and historical cold fusion research. Over the course of his decade with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, he's reviewed and shared the work of many other significant contributors to the field, including a number of experiments and documents of which had not been publicly available in English before. Some significant names in the field that Bob has either collaborated with or promoted or reviewed the work of throughout his time with MFMP include Takaaki Matsumoto, Ken Shoulders, Anatoly Klimov, Anatoly Nikitin, Max Fomitchev-Zamiliev, Alexander Shishkin, Alexander Parkanov, Slobodan Stankovic, and this list is in no way definitive. You'll find the work of many other global fusion and cavitation researchers showcase or reference over on the MFMP YouTube channel. And I can't stress how important this repository of open-sourced research actually is, because if you start Googling some of these names, you'll find that a lot of this stuff is really not that easy to find if you're not directed explicitly where to find it. So Bob Grainger has made a name for himself in the field as one of the world's foremost experts in ball lightning plasmoid research. He has spent a decade establishing a framework within which these phenomena can be reliably synthetically reproduced and studied. He's co-author of perhaps the world's first peer-reviewed paper on water bubble cavitation and ball lightning, published in a major journal. Again, we'll talk about that in a moment. And his most recent findings may just constitute one of the most important scientific discoveries, or more precisely, rediscoveries, evidently, made in recorded history. No small thing, and we'll be getting to those findings shortly. First, though, we'll finish off the story of Bob, Malcolm, and Dr. Huang, who all play a major role in this. Bob and Malcolm's stories converge shortly after the thunderstorm generators unveiling at Tesla Tech last year. A mutual contact arranged a meeting between Bob, Malcolm, and some of the other independent engineers and scientists who had worked on retrofitting the thunderstorm generator with Malcolm before the conference. And Bob was invited to come and independently perform his own investigations on several of the prototypes, including the smaller generator retrofits and the large Perkins grid-tied thunderstorm generator installation in the UK. So he was admittedly initially somewhat skeptical. He's dealt with a lot of these systems before, some real, some fake. But he was encouraged by the fact that Malcolm allowed him free rein to run and perform testing on the unit, and Malcolm didn't insist on being present during Bob's investigations. So he went ahead with this. So after this, Malcolm invited Bob to speak with him and give his independent review of the thunderstorm generator, his hypothesis for how it worked, and his considerations on the engineering of the device at a major scientific conference in Zurich, Switzerland. And Bob agreed to attend and speak at this as an independent, Malcolm not reviewing or checking what he was going to say. It was just going to be a bit of a surprise. And this was all well and good with Malcolm. Bob followed through on this promise, and he did give his first public independent review of the thunderstorm generator in Zurich. And you can find those recordings of Bob speaking at that conference over on the MP channel, as well as a later conference he spoke at in India, and some extra clips about those events on the same topics. And we also covered those events over here on Alchemical Science. So these were really informative lectures. Bob gave a review of the thunderstorm generator, and it turned out to be very positive at Zurich. He confirmed that Malcolm's invention appeared so far to be doing what he claimed, and he hypothesized that upon deeper analysis they would find further evidence that Malcolm Bendel's plasmoids and other reactions occurring in the thunderstorm generator were exactly the same reactions that Bob and his colleagues had already been observing and studying in their own reactors, which they come to collectively refer to as ball lightning. And this evidence that he was going to be looking for was these iron-rich crenellated spheres, primarily, the magnetic core of these ball lightning structures, and other signatures related to this. And these signatures are those which Bob had observed in these other cavitation experiments, and which had been confirmed by the independent observation of others in the past. So just a quick note about ball lightning or plasmoids. The name has always been up for debate a little. So many people have independently discovered this phenomena by this point that there are as many names for it as there are people who've discovered it. This confuses the heck out of everyone, and that is unfortunate, but you'll generally hear me referring to these plasma structures on the channel as either plasmoids or ball lightning. And when I'm saying plasmoids, I'm usually referring to what Malcolm calls Shamir plasmoids, which are specifically waterborne plasmoids. And I probably should be less lazy about differentiating this. There are inherent dangers related to plasmoids born in air that are not present with plasmoids born in water. So it's important to note that the term plasmoid on its own is somewhat of an umbrella term that could refer to several different things. So this is the same in the case of ball lightning, which, as I mentioned, refers to the same toroidal plasma phenomena. Not all ball lightning is the same, nor does the same thing, although there is some commonalities. You may have noticed just before that I used the phrase born in water rather than produced in water. And this is intentional, and it brings us to perhaps the strangest fact about ball lightning, and something which is important to consider when we go through Bob's most recent findings shortly. Ball lightning is conscious. It is essentially a living entity with a stable form made of plasma. And although large and naturally occurring ball lightning structures have sometimes acted with alarming levels of independence, see the work of Anatoly Nikitin, his story about the diesel train, or again MFMP for a number of poignant examples. The smaller ball lightning structures being produced within the cavitation systems could perhaps be compared to bees or birds. So they naturally attempt to keep the energy in the system they're contained within equalized. The small ball lightning structures work to keep the larger system in homeostasis. So if a suitable differential of thermal coefficient is created between the two surfaces, or in other words, a polarity is formed between the two surfaces, one with a positive charge and one with a negative charge, such as the differential created by the opposing cold and hot vortexes within the nested spheres of the thunderstorm generator, then the ball lightning structures which are formed in the previous phase of the system will essentially arc between the two polarized surfaces in an attempt to equalize their extreme opposing forces. An easy way to picture this is to observe the thin worms or tendrils of violet plasma that form between the two surfaces of the plasma globe, which was originally invented by Nikola Tesla. This is essentially the effect that is occurring in the thunderstorm generator. The brighter and larger of these reactions can actually be sometimes seen flashing from the outside of the nested spheres and pipes when the unit's running, particularly in the new so-called stubby design, which will soon be set out to global independent testing teams for peer review and analysis. These plasma arcs are the ball lightning structures reacting and arcing between the two surfaces to attempt to equalize them. Now, you may be thinking, that's just how charge works, isn't it? Like a battery. This doesn't necessarily mean ball lightning is some kind of elastic energy worm, which is doing these things with an elemental form of consciousness. And that could be a reasonable argument if it weren't for a number of other findings, which we'll get to in full shortly when we arrive at Bob's most recent results. They're alive. I just wanted to bring this up now because it sets the scene for what we can learn from what comes next. Another thing that I should quickly mention is that a lot of people they get a little bit confused when we jump from describing ball lightning or plasmoids, balls of light, or toroids of energy to suddenly describing them as tendrils of light or worms. These worms are actually opposing vortexes, the hyperboloid or hourglass shape, the inverse shape of the toroid, meeting at the point of equilibrium, or what is commonly called a zero point, or the plane of inertia between the two polarized extremes of the vortexes. Although my wife and I designed the logo for Alchemical Science before I actually even knew about any of this, plasmoids, ball lightning, it was actually based on Marco Rodin's toroidal VBM model and the Greek letter phi, which I believe to have a more esoteric meaning than the one commonly ascribed to it. One that's probably maybe a little clearer in this context, actually, as well as Ken Wheeler's excellent explanations of the structure of the conjugate magnetodielectric field. But this symbol does indeed happen to be a plasmoid too. Most convenient. But I don't really believe in coincidences, of course, these days. These are all, of course, different ways of describing the same thing. It is a plasmoid. At any rate, you can get somewhat of an idea of how the toroid in red and the hyperboloid, the hourglass or the worm shape, consisting of the two opposing vortexes in blue in the Alchemical Science logo, simultaneously form the structures that we're talking about here. It's not a precise representation, but it certainly serves to illustrate the idea well enough. So anyway, back to the story. After the conference in Zurich, Bob put it to Malcolm that he would need to take a cutout sample from the inside of the outside spheres of the thunderstorm generator so that he could conduct deeper and independent analysis with macrophotography, microphotography, and under the scanning electron microscope if he was to go any further with helping Malcolm prove his invention, did what he claimed. And Malcolm wasn't initially thrilled about this, I know, because I spoke to him on the phone a few days afterwards and he was still grumbling about how he'd intended this unit to go in a museum as one of his first. But Bob gave Malcolm his ultimatum. He needed a sample for further analysis, so there was nothing further he could do to help Malcolm verify his claims. So Malcolm soon relented, and it turned out to be incredibly lucky for both Malcolm and Bob that he did. Malcolm started to cut out the sample to send to Bob, but Bob told him to pause right away to avoid any potential contamination, and he took the next plane over to London with his micro and macro photography equipment to perform the analysis immediately on site. So this all happened, and you can find videos from Bob, Johanna, and myself covering these results in more detail over on our respective channels. They'll all be linked to down below. So these hexagonal arrays and the ring spots we see here in the image, they're riddled somewhat routinely spaced all over the sample. These were exactly what Bob had hypothesized he would find earlier in Zurich. These had a very strong, almost certain potential of being the hallmark signs of ball lightning or plasmoids that Bob had observed in the various other cavitation experiments and those independently observed by Dr. Matsumoto previously to this. And he calculated there to be over a quadrillion of these polygonal impact marks over the entirety of the inside of the outside spheres, based on the number that could be observed on a small section of the sample. This was a very promising early indicator of the discoveries which were about to come next, and an initial validation of the hypothesis Bob had made at the Zurich conference. Next, he would be looking for further remnants of the fusion process that act as the trademark calling cards of these plasma entities under the electron microscope. In particular, the signature iron-rich crenellated microspheres that had been observed in the other reactors and in previous experiments. So signs that ball lightning was present and doing work in the system. In this case, harvesting matter like carbon and other elements and taking them through the determined and replicable steps of synthesis, or in other words, degrees of transmutation, which Bob had established as part of the baseline of his model, formed over his decade of research with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. In Bob's live and unfiltered SEM EDS sessions, analyzing two small samples cut out from both the inside sphere and the outside sphere of one of the first thunderstorm generator prototypes, he did indeed find exactly what he expected. But just minutes into the session, he began to observe not just 1 or 10, but countless crenellated microspheres, consisting primarily of iron and oxygen of many different sizes, covering many areas of the sample. And these spheres are one of the best initial indicators that ball lightning reactions have been occurring in the system. Bob compared them during his session to the structures shown in the images from a paper published by Dr. Takaki Matsumoto in 2002, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse. But they've been consistently present in other cavitation systems too. These spheres are, as Bob puts it, the magnetic core of ball lightning. When the ball lightning structures draw matter into their clockwise imploding vortex and through the zero point, or the plane of inertia, they begin to produce these magnetic crenellated iron and oxygen spheres at their core. When the reactions are finished, we find these magnetic cores deposited on the positively charged surface in the system, which in this case was, of course, the inside of the outside sphere of the thunderstorm generator. And essentially describe this process in the simplest way I possibly can. We've already established earlier that ball lightning appears to be somewhat of a conscious elemental entity. The ball lightning is feeding on available matter and energy, or these are practically the same thing as Bob explains in his videos, but they're ejecting these dense spheres afterwards as a waste product. So they're shitting them out, in other words. Is anyone else young enough to remember the Nibelonians on Futurama, who ate whatever was available around them and then they shit out these balls of dark matter spaceship fuel? There was something up with that show. I'm on to you, Mr. Groening. So anyway, the SEM EDS session, of course, didn't end here. This was just the first few minutes, and throughout the rest of the multiple-hour session, Bob continued to find the story of the life of a plasmoid, written clearly on the sample. By this, I mean that he found pretty much all of the elemental and geometric signatures that he had observed in previous viable cavitation systems, including the reactors of Dr. Bingjuan Huang, who he was currently in the process of writing his groundbreaking paper with on the same phenomena at this time. And these signatures were not hard to find. The ball lightning activity occurring in the thunderstorm generator spheres was highly prolific. And again, myself, Bob, and Jahan all have videos covering these findings. You can go and check these out if you'd like to know more about this. But just to recap on a couple of significant observations, start to build the picture. These yin and yang structures are very commonly found in the analysis of other cavitation systems that he was finding here in this session. The lighter side is the yang side, the destruction zone, where matter's being torn apart and the metal is being cleaned off. And in the base material, we find iron, chrome, and nickel in the same ratios, typical of the stainless steel used to construct the sphere. And then this darker side is the yin side, and this is where the atomic reconstruction occurs. And there's a hard line between the two sides. So we find many of these crenellated microspheres here again in the darker yin area, as well as iron and oxygen-rich spheres. He also finds silica and aluminium-rich spheres and calcium co-located with sulfur. So further signatures of the stepwise transmutation process, typical for ball lightning. And what you're seeing here in these yin and yang structures, this is a really major part of Bob's new results and of his models. We'll get a little more to this soon, and overlay the geometry. But another significant observation was these worm-like paths riddled throughout the darker areas of the sample, which had nanospheres deposited evenly spaced along them. And Bob commented that this was very reminiscent of the idios or plasmoids eating through the diamond and silica dioxide in the late Neil Crichton Gould's Lion reactors, which also left little crystals behind in the gaps. And there's plenty more, but as I'll say, I'll leave you to check out my video, or Bob or Johanna's if you want to delve deeper into those sessions. I've just shown a few images here. And this was actually only the sample from the inside of the outside sphere. There was also the sample from the outside of the inside sphere, which Bob put under scrutiny next. So I won't go through all of this because you can go and watch the other videos about it, but it was just further confirmation that the fractal toroidal moment was occurring. We could see this same phenomena occurring, metal and elements being ripped up from one side and deposited as something else, steps of these transmutation process in certain geometries on the other side. So these initial very promising SEM EDS observations laid the groundwork for Bob and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project to move forward with recent further testing on the thunderstorm generator that we'll speak about shortly. But at this point, we knew that ball lightning was here. The transmutation process Bob had established in his model could be seen being played out in the thunderstorm generator. It was shortly after these sessions when things really started to get serious for Malcolm's plans to see the thunderstorm generator mass-produced and rolled out worldwide. Everything he'd been claiming was indeed occurring. Malcolm and Bob announced that the Indian Navy were now involved in helping spearhead the technology, the research and development in India, and that several other very large international funding entities had now committed to providing as much funding as required to see it rolled out worldwide, pending further analysis and peer review, which is happening at the moment, and this is part of that. So if you go through some of the old videos on MFMP, you'll find more hints about this and where that could be coming from. And on that note, if you're interested in putting your skin in the game yourself, you can actually invest in the thunderstorm generator. I'm very much focused on the open source side of things, and I really began covering this because it was something that could be replicated at home by experimenters like myself. And I'm glad to say it still can be built by whoever wants to give it a shot. From the hardware store parts you'll find outlined in my DIY build guide, for example. And Malcolm open sourced this so it couldn't just go away. And it is still open source. This being said, as we all know, the results we can get from these DIY experimental prototypes at home, it's rarely going to be as efficient and reliable as a unit that's been precision engineered for specific installations and had the bugs ironed out. And there has indeed already been a lot of progress optimizing the new pre-production prototypes, including shortening the pipes and annealing and pressure quenching of the pipes and spheres and some specific processes there that Malcolm's mentioned. So to actually get it to the stage where we can easily fit it to all of these different things that we want to, and at the level of optimization it needs to be at for large-scale adoption, we do now need to see it industrially mass-manufactured. And I get a lot of questions about this. So for anyone who is part of a larger concern that's interested in licensing the thunderstorm generator nationally, Malcolm said you could reach out to Samadhi Halkett-Lewis of the Strike Foundation. And Strike Foundation is Malcolm Mendel's own organization, which was established to preserve and promote his inventions and his work. And I've put Samadhi's email up here on the screen. Land Logical Power were announced several months back as the licensee in the UK. I know they're working with Alpha Prospects, and I haven't been in contact with these guys at all at this stage, but you can find more about them on their website, and I expect you can get in touch with them about this. So for everyone else, Alpha Prospects are the company who's been working with Malcolm over the long term. They've funded a large part of his R&D so far, particularly in the early days before Malcolm had gone public with this at all. So they hold the licenses or investments in some of the other larger licensees to produce and distribute the thunderstorm generator in multiple countries, including the US and Thailand. And I believe you can find the full list and other announcements regarding that side of things on their website. So I've included their email for Alpha Prospects here too. Christopher Foster is the CEO and their main contact in the UK and the West. And Kevin Baker is their contact for Thailand and some of those related operations. But you can get in contact with either of those at that same address there. They've let me know. Now, please note that I'm not giving investment advice or anything like that here, nor would I be qualified to do so, nor do I represent any of these companies, nor am I a contact for them, which is why I'm providing these details here. I'm really enthusiastic about the tech, and I have my own opinions and predictions about how this is going to go, but none of that's investment advice. This channel primarily focuses on the theory and the developments around the tech, not investment, industry, mass production, etc. These aren't areas I have experience in, nor am I involved in them. I just want to cover them. But now let's get back to our timeline of Bob's recent endeavors. Shortly after the SEM EDS session on the thunderstorm generator, something else big happened. The peer-reviewed paper, Water Can Trigger Nuclear Reaction to Produce Energy and Isotope Gases, co-authored by Bob Grainger, lead author Dr. Bingjue Huang, and their colleagues shown here on the screen was published in the scientific journal Nature. And this was big in a number of ways. Firstly, it was the first peer-reviewed paper on these types of phenomena and systems to be published in a major journal, at least to my knowledge. Although there are a wealth of other papers on cavitation and ball lightning, many of which Bob himself references, the vast majority have either been declassified military papers, research that was largely suppressed from mainstream publication, or foreign research that was either never published in English or is, for the most part, unavailable or very difficult to find, even if it is available. So the fact that this paper was pushed through to be in a journal like Nature, a major mainstream academic journal, this was huge news. Dr. Huang reported soon after publication that the article was being widely read. It was in the top 4% popularity globally, and it stimulated a whole new level of discussion about ball lightning and these systems that could produce it. And I have, of course, a link to this paper in the description. I encourage anyone to at least give it a skim through. And if this is your field of expertise, maybe give it some serious study. Bob is offering to provide samples from Dr. Binjuan Huang's DHX-2 reactor for analysis by anyone with access to a scanning electron microscope who is serious about gathering and publicly releasing more data on all of this. And Malcolm Bendel has backed up this offer and said he'll make samples available from the Thunderstorm generator for the same purpose. Obviously, these will be limited, but get in contact with those guys if you're interested. So if you have access to a suitable laboratory and you want to assist in the peer review and the analysis of Bob, Malcolm, and Dr. Huang's cavitation systems, you can get in touch with those respective parties. So I've displayed their contact information on the screen. Bob's your contact here if you want to get a sample of Dr. Huang's reactor, and Strike Foundation is your way to get in contact with Malcolm and his team. Now, there's a lot more to this whole story. I've done my best to document the whole timeline as it's happened on Alchemical Science. I missed probably a number of things, but a lot of it's there. I've provided hundreds of references and links probably in the descriptions at this point in those videos that really further flesh out parts of this story. So if you want to go and find out more about any particular thing I'm saying, head to my videos, have a little search through, and you will find a whole lot more. But now it's time to get to Bob's latest findings of the past few weeks. And like I've mentioned, this is not just one significant finding, it's a bunch of significant findings that all came about at once, and they add up to mean something just totally profound, a potentially completely paradigm-shifting moment for humanity, if we choose to take it, and not allow it to slip back into the cracks and disappear, as we have so many times before this. So let's start with the Thunderstorm generator, and then we'll move on to Dr. Huang's DHX-2 reactor. The next step to finding out more about the processes occurring in the Thunderstorm generator was to have mass spectrometry done on the sample to determine the age of the carbon residue that Bob found during his SEM sessions, such as in the hollow center of a cracked crenellated microsphere and in other exploded structures. So the age of the carbon would give an indication of the predominant carbon isotope present. Specifically, Bob was looking for an indication of carbon-13 or carbon-14. Bob hypothesized that should he find this, it would be a very strong indicator that the carbon was being synthesized or manufactured during the fractal toroidal moment. Or, in other words, the carbon-14 could very likely be a waste product of the plasmoid fusion process, like we talked about earlier. So there are a couple reasons why carbon-14 would be indicative of this. The first being that it's part of the timeline of ball lightning synthesis that Bob has observed in these other systems over his decade with MFMP. It would be another indicator that this is the same stepwise process of transmutation that was occurring again here in the spheres of the Thunderstorm generator, per Bob's hypothesis based on his initial observations during the SEM and macrophotography session. And the second reason being the large 24-inch sphere of the retrofit that the sample was taken from was installed on a methane or natural gas generator. It was a custom build specifically for purpose, and it wasn't trialed on any other engines or used with any other fuels. So this is important because in short, it means that carbon-14 shouldn't be present in the sample. Although it can be present in some fuels such as biodiesel, and there are others, any carbon-14 that could have been present in methane at some point in its formation would have long since decayed away naturally. So these samples were submitted 6 or 7 weeks ago to Vilnius Radiocarbon, an accelerator mass spectrometry laboratory in Lithuania that specializes in this very specific range of masses, and they could give a highly accurate dating of the sample. And they came back last week on the 14th of March. And I've displayed them here on the screen if anyone wishes to read the details and the method of analysis. The material of sample was labeled as food crust. And this is simply because the lab didn't have any idea what Bob was looking to find in the sample from a combustion engine. But you can see the correct sample designation indicated as Thor 24-inch inside down below there. And you can check out Bob's original video to hear him talk more about this. And I also have another video covering this announcement with some choice clips of what Bob had to say when the results came back and beforehand. So the part we're looking at here is the radiocarbon age of the sample. And this is maybe a little bit clearer on the second page of the certificate, where it's indicated that the carbon sample has a 68% probability of being 32,775 years old, and a high 95% probability of being 33,166 years old. All right, so what does that mean? Let's give some context first. There are kind of two parts to this. The first is that it means that there is carbon-14, as Bob hypothesized based on his previous observations. So the radiocarbon date would suggest that the biological material has gone through 5 half-lives, the half-life of carbon-14 being around 5,730 years. Now, obviously, if the fuel that the engine ran on did not contain carbon-14, which, as the engine this unit was built for, ran on methane, and this can be attested for by multiple people. The generator in question was a Caterpillar G3508G, Malcolm says, for anyone who's interested. Then the carbon material, it simply shouldn't be this old. Some scientists have been quick to dismiss this result simply because of this fact that it shouldn't be that old. The system shouldn't be producing carbon this old based on how we currently understand chemistry and physics, unless there was some kind of other reason to explain this, a simple explanation, some kind of contamination. So, of course, no one's ruling out that there could have been some potential contamination other than fuel, but the data is the data so far. This result gives us a very strong indicator that there is more to be found, and it is indeed what Bob hypothesized. There should not have been carbon-14 or carbon dated this old in the sample. Shouldn't be there. So if you're concerned about this being announced as absolutely undeniable evidence of the whole transmutation process, hold your horses. That's not the claim here, but it's another very, very strong indication that transmutation is occurring in the system following the typical processes outlined in Bob's established model. And the next step is that Bob will attempt to find out if these results can be corroborated with a controlled experiment using fresh charcoal in MFMP's supernova reactor. And he'll also gather other samples from Malcolm's 24-inch sphere, which Malcolm's already committed to provide, so we can look for the ratios of carbon-13 to carbon-12, as well as nitrogen-15 over nitrogen-14, and a few other things to better identify and understand the intermediary process of transmutation. So once this data is obtained, we'll have an even clearer idea of what's going on, and there can really be zero doubts and contamination. So if you want to hold that skepticism, that's fine. But so far, yeah, the data is meeting by Bob's hypothesis, and it would seem that this is indeed manufactured carbon. This is part of the process of transmutation. So yeah, if you're on the more skeptical side, hold your judgment. No one's trying to be woolly here. The nature of open source research is that the process is open source. Results are released on the fly, and this ensures that it is open, honest, and as transparent as it can be. Nothing can really be hidden or skewed, because you can go back and see the whole story as it played out. And remember, you can indeed go and do this. If you jump over to the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project channel, they have an absurd amount of videos over 10 years of research and progress in this field. Now, with this disclaimer out of the way, I mentioned that there were two parts to what this 33,000-year-old radiocarbon date result means. The second part involves the deeper implications of Malcolm Bendel's technology and the plasmoid unification model, which serves as the theory behind his practical inventions. So what exactly is transmutation of the elements? How does it occur? There is a wonderfully complicated explanation using standard chemistry, and I'm not saying that that doesn't have a place, but I'm not a chemist. I am an alchemist. Transmutation has everything to do with time. It's explained in great detail in Malcolm Bendel's notes, and many of my videos on mathematics and plasmoid unification model do aim to touch on this and start to build the bridge. But it's not a really easy thing to explain. Space and time are like different languages to describe the same occurrence. Reality doesn't run on a programming language of protons, electrons, particles. These are just designations we give to space-time events occurring within a certain spectrum of frequency so that we can keep up the pretense that the universe came from matter. It runs on geometry and sound. That's the system here. And geometry and sound are ultimately, again, just two different aspects of the same thing. The geometry of the cavity of a musical instrument will determine the sound it makes, the frequency which resonates within the cavity of the structure. The geometry of a cavitation in the ether, the unified field, also determines the frequency of the perturbation. Frequency is work over time. If we can change the time factor rather than trying to change the work factor, then we do not have to do more work to produce a greater result. So a quote from Malcolm Bendall, "Time is the mold in which matter is formed. Matter goes through a process of transmutation by altering the vessel rather than the matter itself inside. Time has geometry and volume. Time is space, space is time." This is unification. The ancients knew this, hence why their systems of measurement and divisions for space and time, they were codified based on the ratios and proportions of natural bodies and phenomena. So we've come up with so many different ways to describe the variegated phenomena we experience in this physical reality, but we are describing different states of the same thing. Ken Wheeler uses the wonderfully illustrative example that ice, water, and steam they're all the same thing, just in different temporarily variegated states, responding to the feedback mechanism that they exist as a part of. So when we talk about hot and cold, we could just as easily talk about expansion and contraction, generally speaking. So sure, if it's a cold day, I understand you would prefer to say, "I'm cold," rather than "I'm contracting." And you could, of course, just feel cold. An emotional response rather than a direct response to the physiological processes going on in your body and the environment around you. That's why language exists. But when we're talking about the most fundamental unified properties of physical reality, hot and expanding and cold and contracting, they become synonymous in a general sense with some exceptions. So we can take this step a little bit further and we could say that contraction occurs by a clockwise spin and expansion occurs by a counterclockwise spin. And we could say that high gravity just means high mass relative to low surface area, and low gravity or levity just means low mass relative to high surface area. Again, general sense. Time is relative to us humans on Earth. It's determined by the gyroscopic cyclical movements of the celestial bodies around Earth through space. Without these cyclical movements through space, there would be no time to consider. No seconds or days, seasons, years, or eras. There would be no stable space-time structure and therefore nothing to measure. And this is incredibly complicated to explain. It's somewhat intuitive, and in my experience, some people just don't get it. But at the core of reality, time and space are the same thing. Everything is unified. The laws of conservation of energy are kind of true. Malcolm Bendall's system is not creating more energy than there already was there. It's instead altering the time factor, using considerations of geometry and harmonics, just like the ball lightning structures themselves. Subject to further controlled experiments, if we consider things within this paradigm, which I do, the claim is that these structures are accelerating the rate of decay of the carbon material dramatically. Transmutation is achieved by dilating or accelerating time. When matter passes through the zero point between the two opposing vortexes of the worm-like plasmoid, arcing between the two nested spheres, it is atomically deconstructed. Time does not apply when there is no time, and this is the case at the center of these vortexes. When it's ejected from the plasmoid as waste, time is accelerated on the way out, and the material has aged immensely by the time the reactions finish, despite the fact that this may have occurred instantaneously from our own frame of reference. So time isn't exactly relative, I would say. That's maybe a simple way to put it that does kind of work, but it's more that it's harmonic. It occurs harmonically on all scales of the fractal. Essentially, if this result is confirmed with controls, time doesn't wait. It doesn't work the way we think it does. Carbon dating doesn't work the way we think it does. In fact, it doesn't tell us at all what we thought it did. Some things, some structures, some artifacts, some remains, they may be far, far, far older than the record state. And let's leave it there for now. We'll wait for more data. But I ask scientists of the world, maybe just start freaking out a little bit. I just want to make it clear for my future satisfaction that based on the available evidence so far, and just how beautifully it's proving Malcolm Bendall's absolutely far out claims, I'm absolutely positive that Malcolm Bendall's claims about his invention are true, and much more precisely true than immediately meets the eye. It is dilating time. Bob certainly believes this is an entirely possible explanation too, and he stated that at this point, there is absolutely no doubt that the thunderstorm generator is producing ball lightning, and it's very likely employing these structures to accelerate the decay of carbon and transmute the carbon exhaust material into oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and other elements. And signatures of this process, they're all there. It's just a matter of finding out exactly how the stepwise process is occurring under controlled conditions now, and looking for even more factors. All right, so the radiocarbon dating on the thunderstorm generator sample was just one of Bob's recent findings, and all of this really starts to tie together in Bob's next SEM sessions and videos, in which he analyzes the samples from Dr. Bin Chuan Huang's VCS5RT and DHX2 reactors, and his live streams after that, which are even more exciting. So again, if you haven't been following Bob's work for a while, it's maybe not immediately apparent why he's getting so worked up about. And I know this for a fact, as I only started really seriously studying Bob's work recently, and I spent an immense amount of time going through MFMP videos, catching up to the point where I began to understand what Bob was trying to show with his model. But the true heart of Bob's research is this 2D geometric modeling of the fractal toroidal moment. Johanna James gives a really easy to understand visual introduction to this, which she put together after spending some time getting to grips with it with Bob. I don't really think I can top it, so I'm just going to play that quickly and set the scene for Bob's new findings. So thanks, Johanna. Please go and check out our full video after this if you haven't seen it already. I've linked to it in the description, and if it worked, you should see the link pop up in the corner about now. Who knows if I just put it in the right direction? We'll see.
So here we have a diagram of what is happening around the space of plasmoids when they are rotating. So we have our donut with our plasmoid moving around and around. We then have the space in between the donut plasmoid is like literally the shape of a lemon. And around the outside, you have almost what looks like an apple, where in the similar way that apples pull in at either end of the core, the North Pole and the South Pole. Now, at the South Pole of it, you can see a kind of like skirt shape. It's wearing like a kind of angel dress.
The plasmoids suck in matter from behind, fueling them, like eating with its butt, transmuting the elements in a toroidal moment. And when they die, they chuck out the changed matter waste. So the iron crenulated microspheres are, in essence, plasmoid poops. They change the way electrons behave, allowing even metals and high-temperature ceramics to be non-thermally fluidized, meaning they behave like a liquid, but without the high temperatures needed to liquefy them. They're then immediately whipped around their apple-like shape. This makes them the world's fastest tunneling machine.
What's crazy is if we zoom in even more, you can see that there are even smaller donuts inside this main ring of donuts. It is literally a spinning wheel within a wheel within a wheel. Where have we heard that before? Was this what the Bible was trying to explain when it recorded Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel within a wheel?
Look at the shape of this toroidal moment. What does it look like?
It is literally the spitting image of the Egyptian Ankh. This one here, this particular Ankh plate, is from the first dynasty, from very, very early on in the dynastic Egypt, literally like 3000 BC. You can see it all through the Coptic Christianity with the Coptic Christian cross. Not only that, you can see it in Thor's hammer. The Viking hammer pendants that we have is literally showing this shape. Take a look at the modern Tesla logo. Again, literally the same dynamic. Now, with the right elements and forces coming into play,
this toroidal moment is scalable.
It can happen at tiny, tiny, tiny micron sizes. It can also happen at a huge scale. Like we're talking whack an aeroplane in the middle of that lemon scale, or even bigger.
All right, so this is where we go full circle and we get back to why a researcher like Randall Carlson from a seemingly totally unrelated field of science took an interest in Malcolm Bendall and the thunderstorm generator. This is not a new technology, and plasmoids are not a new phenomena. Bob is well aware of this too. This is something many ancient advanced civilizations were aware of. It's documented all throughout science, architecture, history, scripture, and esoterica. These secrets of the universe have been primarily codified and passed down in the form of geometry and art, direct form and function. Malcolm's work also deals heavily in this, and for anyone who's seriously interested in the science of decryption, I must also at this point recommend subscribing to the work of my friend and fellow researcher Edward G. Nightingale, and he's a modern-day master of the art of decryption, and he could add a lot of value to this conversation, likely. Link in the description, as always. But back to the main concern for the moment, the following clips I'm going to play from Bob, they show this geometric signature laid over structures resulting from the fractal toroidal moment, starting with the sample from the DHX2 reactor. And this is what the fractal toroidal moment looks like. Wheels within wheels within wheels. Fractal structures with discernible geometry on several scales. This fractal toroidal moment can take several distinct forms depending on the nature of the reaction, but these are forms we see everywhere in nature. Do not expect to see absolutely precisely defined shapes or perfect lines if you're new to all of this. This isn't how it works. It's like the mathematics that I try and teach on alchemical science. Everything has a root, a monic value, an objective guiding form and function. However, these values become highly variegated as events play out in the physical world, and the event in question becomes subject to the great feedback mechanism of our universe. In other words, it becomes subject to its own specific circumstances and conditions. So droplets of water may splash in a slightly different direction depending on the part of the surface they hit. However, do take note of how precisely the geometry does overlay and how clear the forms are within this context. And you'll see where this geometry comes from in these clips as well. This is where it gets really pretty exciting and quite profound if you've been following this along for a while and if you kind of knew this was coming. Let's see what Bob has to say.
I think hopefully, even though this will be dirty and raw as a presentation, you will get that the sacred geometry fractal structure is the seed of life. It is able to transmute matter, and the evidence that has come from this particular sample from Binjuan Huang, he has literally meters of this material, and he could send it to any lab in the world that needs to have some corroborating evidence. And it is so phenomenal, it beggars all belief. It precisely shows how this works. It precisely shows how it can damage material. It is exactly a fractal structure. It is exactly the sacred geometry. I couldn't have wished for a better sample. And it is, you will see, synthesizing matter. I don't think there can be any doubt. When you see the images that I will share with you this very day, you will have no doubt that we have the power to transmute matter just using sound, cavitation, and water. It is a deep, deep honor to have been able to observe this, and it is my pleasure to present this to you today. Now, this one here, with this material here, I was interested in this material because I just thought, oh, I'll look at that. But it was only later that I realized that, look at this. Boom! This material is all coming out of this one structure. How is that even possible? How is that even possible? Well, copper is 63 and 65 nucleons. And phosphorus is 31 nucleons. Of course, if the bulk of this really is carbon, okay, then that is only 12 nucleons. This is exactly what we observed in an iron-rich crenellated sphere in the work of Henk Uren in the Vega experiment. But it was previously observed by Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto. So thank you and full credit to Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto for observing this first. But here we are really seeing the thing that's doing the work and what's coming out of it. And this supports the claim of the 1992 patent by Mikhail Solin that magnetic charges, that is a flux capacitor, is able to gather and crush. And as Luke Zietner said in 2019 at ICCF 22 in Azizi, and you can go and see his presentation on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, he said that the magnetic flux can reach 50 million Teslas. That's 5 orders of magnitude more than the inside of our sun. It's the same magnetic pressure as you get in a pulsar, which is a type of neutron star. Okay? And these are obviously, effortlessly produced in relatively simple apparatus that Binzhuan Huang is using to create excess heat. And the excess heat must be coming, one might assume, from these nuclear processes, which are very clear. And so, and effortlessly doing this. So this little guy here has had nuclear reactions, and this is what Solin said. The magnetic charges accumulate, the toroidal magnetic charges accumulate into spheres, and inside those spheres, nuclear reactions occur, including right down to the decay of baryons. Okay, the decay of baryons. This is exactly what Kladov said. You can get complete collapse of matter into field forms of matter. That's what he said in his 1990 and 2003 work, okay, on his website. And so you can see, if this has to all come from in there, it implies that either there is a structure in there that's converting the copper into these other elements, as you'll see what they are in a second, on the fly, or that the atoms are trapped in there and they're completely stripped of their electrons, and the fusion is going on or whatever, and it's only at the demise of the containment field of this structure that it spews out these elements. For me, guys, absolutely what you are seeing here on this screen is 100% categorical proof that cavitation in any place that it occurs has the potential to synthesize new elements, nascent elements. And as I've argued, even in my 2019 poster presentation, in reference to what was observed on the vibration system of Dr. Roy Shinamaza, and referring to our ultra experiment, this is the way nature, I believe, creates bioavailable elements, and that is why I think living life likes to live near the coast waters, or near fast-running streams, or near springs, or near hydrothermal vents, because it's literally it's synthesizing new matter. And what you're seeing on here is utterly conclusive in my mind. Utterly conclusive. And it's not a one-off. This is why I kept looking. But of course, I didn't notice this guy down here when I first looked at it. But anyway, so what are we getting in there? We are getting, in this particular ejector here, obviously, by, I think that's by mass, yeah, by atom percent, 70.54% is carbon atoms. I'm going to zoom into that so you can get a better look. By atom percent, 70.45% is carbon atoms, 24.57% is oxygen atoms, and then you start getting the fusion of isotopes of these two into aluminium, and obviously carbon oxygen fuses to silicon, so you get quite a lot of that, and then lesser elements here through to copper. So this is the first exposure I have to what's going on here, and that was from this area here. And do I have another look at it? No, I go on to something else. Anyway, so this is the first of many examples that you are going to see of the proof of transmutation in cavitation system. As you will see today, there is all of the typical elements that you see in interstellar space being synthesized. That indicates that this is the flower of life. That indicates that we can use this technology to go to a barren planet, which is in the habitable zone, and use whatever material is there to synthesize the matter for life. And that is not just on the actual elements that are solid, but this will also be producing gases. And because it's yin-yang, there will be a lot of hydrogen produced, particularly if you're using lower mass elements, and then it produces the spread spectrum of the bulk of the elements that are in your body. So this will enable terraforming and the improving of atmospheres on other planets. So this is just absolutely mind-boggling, so let's get on with it. Okay. Now, look at what is going on here. We have two that are trying to get together, and then this. Is this part of this structure? I don't know. But look, you have these vortical rings of material. I kind of wish I'd analyzed this, because I can pretty much tell you, and you're going to see it later on, that this is this blend of synthesized matter, and it's literally spilt its guts. And you're going to see this spilling of its guts, total spilling of their guts. And it's almost like another Taurus has come in here. You're going to see something so unbelievably beautiful later on, and it's going to be totally explicit what is going on. At this point, I start to realize that there are these objects where the guts are coming out of them. And I just take a whole bunch of these with these fragments stuck to the poles or being spewed out of the structure. Again, this one's been breached at this point, and the material is flowing out. This material, which is all of the elements you need for life, but typically also the elements that are formed in the crust, but coming from, it would seem, copper and water. Okay, look at this little beauty here. Look at this little beauty. It's literally like a little comet. We have our semi-deflated structure here, and it's spewed out this comet tail of these filaments of this material here. And again, there's some more of that kind of thing going on down here. And so, all right, it's at this point now. Well, I'm gonna look at this, and then we'll talk about the next boom, which is nearly imminent. Okay, right. So, okay. So in the first sample point here, well, basically the sample points here show production of not necessarily everywhere the same, but you've got carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, potassium, magnesium, aluminium, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine, potassium, calcium, and iron, with copper in every single sample point. Okay, so this shows to me that we have synthesized material. And I think the signature of this synthesized material is it's this like gray kind of homogeneous blob. And the idea that you can get material as contamination that has both organic and inorganic material in a kind of glassy blob and emitted from, you know, one of these structures, it's kind of a little bit tenuous to kind of believe that it's not actually coming from the structure. Right. But anyway, you can see here what I call the Oreos. They seem to have a polygonal outside. So we've got 1, 2, 3. I'm going to zoom into that maybe. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 maybe. They can have a different number. And this is flat on. And you can see they have a substructure in them. And then this is buried into the side, on its side. So here we go. When I looked at this, and then I went to bed, and I thought to myself, they've all got this particular aspect ratio. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. And then I thought, it probably is. So thank you to Tony Giboni for this particular model, but I only overlaid, as I said earlier, the 2D geometry. It's not at the angle. So for instance, this is not, it's actually tilting towards the bottom right here, but you'll get it. 3, 2, 1, boom! Oh dear, can you see what it is yet? Can you see what it is yet? It is exactly and precisely the ratio of the sacred geometry. Let's turn it off. Let's turn it on. And you can see where the Sothic triangle comes out here. It's just shy. In fact, the center line of those feelers coming out. And it comes exactly down to the center of the mouth in the human anatomy. Okay? But of course, when this was wound up, this would be coming out a lot further. The tornado that comes out would be coming out a lot further. I predict that when I put the 3D geometry over this and correctly align it, the Sothic triangle will exactly match the type of line here. Of course, we do know, because this is a vortex nature and it winding around, that if the clustering under here is below the swastika, the 4 levels substructure inside here, then it will have it will spread out more and more and more in like a hyperboloid spiral type thing, or some type of spiral, rather than being a more focused tornadic beam. Okay. Now, what this shows us is that the inside, the core here, is the central tor. Okay, and this is the apple. Okay, so what they are doing with hot fusion is they're essentially trying to build stuff in this tokamak here, this tor in the middle, but we can see that it is influencing material all the way out to the apple, and we know for certain that if this is spun up to a high degree, it will end up influencing matter all the way out to the non-radiating boundary, beyond which there will be no influence whatsoever. None at all with ordinary matter. But what this implies is that a hot fusion tokamak reactor, wait for it, will never work. 100% certainly, because you cannot fight nature. If you get it doing what it wants to do, which is this quantum coherent nuclear process, it will self-organize with those diachron instabilities and those magnetic islands. And sooner or later, it will literally destroy the reactor. It's not a choice. It will just do it. Here we have our second one. It's a different one. Trust me, it's a different one. But also, how big is it? Well, if we look at the scale, notice the title's still wrong down here. The scale is 20 microns. And if I take that scale and invert it and overlay it, it's almost exactly 20 microns. And this is one of the stated quantization levels of Kenneth Radford shoulders. Absolutely spot on. Well done, Kenneth Radford shoulders. Congratulations. This is literally one of the quantization levels. And we have seen this in basic ultra experiments where it creates the yin-yang. And there is zero or very little effect outside here for a lot of the cases. And you can see how precise this is and how the tornado tail is like bending off to one side, just as it is necessarily doing in the Great Pyramid of Egypt, that quantum coherent ether vortex generation system that we have in Egypt. 3, 2, 1, boom! They are Oreo shape because they meet in the middle. You get it? They are in those structures. They are in those structures. Okay? Now, if they come out, they can start to become more vol-au-vent-ish, but it's all over. And what this particular image here is telling us a beautiful story of the death of 3 of these structures. And what happens is you can see that they still have some relative moment left. So this one died. This one died in one orientation, and as this was spinning down, this one started to roll back round this way. Okay, it wanted to travel because this one was a little bit more dynamic than this one. This one died, and this one wanted to roll back round this way. So they are basically the same thing. This one, its pair did die, but it was more active than this one. And you know what? The center of the vortex here is left a hole. It's left a hole. Okay? This is, in my mind, utterly conclusive. Utterly conclusive that the substructures are these structures. Okay? Absolutely conclusive. We literally have a new method to simply create the most important elements for life. And let's have a look at the scale. The scale typically here, if we move this around a bit, from, well, actually it's this one we want to look at, from the center of the gyro. These are 2, 4, 6 and a bit microns. Well, Ken Shoulders said that typically the smaller ones were about 5 microns, so that's within a stone's throw of what Ken Shoulders said. Okay? So this is wheels within wheels within wheels. And you will see in these samples there are even smaller wheels. Can you see it? Can you see it? There's a little Oreo here. There's a little Oreo here. Wheels within wheels within wheels. And the other thing is, I didn't realize at the point when I was looking at this, out of this one, it's got this carbonaceous type ejector. Carbonaceous type ejector. So these are able to do what the bigger one is able to do. Maybe these ones, and it's all a case of how much does it spin up. I feel so lucky to have been put into a position where I could see this. And you guys are the first people to see this. And you've got the opportunity to make this happen. You have to get the word out. This has implications for just water flowing down pipes, but water flowing in streams. Water in movement is so much more special than just water in movement. It is literally creating the elements that we are comprised of and that the land that we stand on is made of, from whatever. And it is the great yin-yang, it's the great balancer. I knew this was a deep responsibility, but I never knew, I could never have imagined that I would get to this point. So many people have sacrificed so much. So many people have had their careers ruined by the lies. It's the lies I can't stand, and the deaths of people for needless wars. Just stop the killing. We have a way forward. My friends, we are at the dawn of an old age. We're not the most intelligent humans that have ever lived on this planet. This is working with nature, and nature is lazy. Humans are lazy. They want to get the most for the least effort possible, and nature wants to do that as well. And these structures that you see on the screen are able to do what we have been taught all of our lives is impossible. Transmutation of one element to another. And there it is, folks. The sacred geometry that underpins most of the world's architecture and is embedded in most of the world's religions to some degree. There it is. It's effortlessly balancing nature, keeping it in harmony, the yin and the yang, making elements where it's needed and desynthesizing where there's too much of one thing. It is a thing of immense beauty and immense significance. It is the great power. And we need to be careful with it because it is, as you can see, able to strip anything from anything. Nothing can contain it. But it's always been with us. It's always been with us in thunderstorms. It's always been with us in cavitation, in water, even in probably your house heating pipes, maybe. We need to respect it. We need to learn from the data that I've shared today, but also, you know, this is just the beginning of the end. I thought, no, I have to do this sooner because I found something in the data that is just totally even next level anything I've said before. And it's going to spook people out. It's going to make us realize that we must have been lied to for at least several hundred years, if not thousands of years, if not many millennia. And it should be totally conclusive that that is the case. This is the only rational conclusion you can come to as a right-minded and right-thinking person. Anyway, maybe that's just my view. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'll let you be the judge. I'm just saying that's what I felt, and that's why even in my absurdly jet-lag state, I felt it was necessary to get this out to you. And it is about this, but not just this, that you see on the screen. So what we have here on the left is 4 elements represented on there from the live session, which I just played you, a recording of that. And the interesting thing here is that in this particular structure, at this particular level of reveal, you see that it had aluminium in this big sort of section here, this sort of angel dress with the wings. And there was a magnesium flash along the apex of the ridge here. And then orbiting around each of these classically, which we defined in our previous data analysis, copper, phosphor, carbon, and oxygen crustaceans. And we know these have structures in here, but before we go to that, there is carbon that is orbiting around here, which we've seen in many systems, principally in Henk Uren's Vega experiments, where the iron-rich crenellated spheres often will have carbon orbiting around their equator. And it's coming over here and orbiting around here. This one notably looks smaller and less damaged, and this one looks fatter and blown up. Okay? And actually, you can see it clearer here. If we go in, this clearly looks like it's still quite well contained on this side. Whereas this one is blown up. You've got a fragment of it here, a couple of fragments here, and then inside you have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can imagine there was another 6 making this a 12 subtor structure in here. And the orientation is weird. Is it really that orientation when it is live, or is it just because it's clearly broken up? The other thing is that you can see here, you've got a 1, 2, 3 clear sort of hexagon type deposit of carbon on this surface. And of course, hexagons are something we see a lot of. It's interesting that we got 6 on this part of the overall structure, and it would appear we have 12 subsections inside this overall sphere. I think that is telling us something between the relationship between this and this. And I would argue that, you know, maybe it's a multiple yin-yangs or something going on that lead to the 6 here as we present it there. Okay. The other thing to me is immediately is this hard cutoff here. It looks like it's still going under here, still going under here, which implies that just like the other image that I shared you in this, it's actually a conical type structure that is in here, under here, and it's going underneath the overall fluidized material here. 3, 2, 1, boom! So what I was absolutely blown away with this is that there is this Sothic triangle type cone here. It would appear that it has a boundary around it, fairly equidistant on either side. And we saw something similar when we were looking at a larger structure with the inflow pattern, assumed to be inflow, in the previous presentation with regard to DHX2 data. And it kind of also is supported by the fact that this is moving a certain amount of material which has a thickness. And we saw this when one of these spheres or spheroid or apple-shaped structures was interacting with the copper. And if you remember, it was scalping a 200 nanometer layer off the copper. And maybe this is, you know, when it's this level, it's actually bigger than just around the actual spheres themselves. It might have a bigger influence here. Anyway, so that's kind of what I was looking at there. Now, there's so many interesting points here. Firstly, I have noticed, and I haven't really talked about this, and it's other data that I need to share with you, but essentially it would appear when these things collapse, a spiral wave will come out of this area here. I will talk about that in a different presentation. But in fact, you saw it on the Ohmasa gas on the tungsten thoriated welding rod. And it specifically comes out at this angle, but I've also got it in an ultra experiment. So I have to share those with you. But I think it's now we can see that it's due to how this breaks down, and that when this breaks down, these inner structures are kind of like forced to go along the golden ratio line. Okay, so for me, that's rather spectacular. Now, the second one is, of course, this isn't perfectly aligned, but there is seemingly a boundary between this internal bit and this external bit. And of course, this itself is a field of influence. So, and you can see how far it influences out from the overall more spherical structure, which is probably a little bit hexagonal inside in terms of its form, when it's only got these 12 subdivisions in here. But anyway, it's coming out at a certain distance. And when you overlay the geometry, you see that it would appear that it is this part of the geometry where you have that distance, and then this is encased in here. So it's really rather exacting. Now, Artifact said he thought this was a blowing up bigger structure. I think he's absolutely correct. Although it blows up, but it blows up so fast that it barely changes form. And so the other interesting thing here is at this layer here, all the way around, you've got majority affected material. Okay, by that what I mean is, like, if you consider that this is the pattern for the human face and human anatomy in general and biology in general. I had this discussion with Alan. He says, well, my face doesn't really look like this. I said, well, here's the thing. There's an underlying program, but the specifics are different. You know, you've got nature and nurture, haven't you? You've got the underlying driving process, but the product that comes out of it has variability. And so when you have something literally hitting a brick wall and coming apart like this does, it's amazing that it is nearly as perfect as you can see here. Okay. Now, the next thing is that this conical area is almost entirely in the mouth part or within the vesica piscis, mostly in the vesica piscis, but mostly it doesn't extend beyond halfway down the mouth part. The other thing is that on this side, it's very different. This looks like a blended material, okay? Then you have this marked section in the middle, and then over here, you have these little circular blobs. Now, I would posit to guess that these little circular blobs are themselves magnetic charges, okay? And we see this in the magnetohydrodynamic vortex and counter-vortex structure that's 12 millimeters across on the outside of one of the Lion reactor's fused quartz, outside of the reactor. And we see it is a vortex and anti-vortex in the sacred geometry formation. But if you look closer in on the way that that fused quartz is damaged, you have a very similar pattern of circular structures, and they tend to be in pairs or in groups. So you maybe have a vortex-anti-vortex pair here, vortex-anti-vortex pair, vortex-anti-vortex pair here. And here you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a ring. You've got a bunch in a ring. You've got a bunch in a ring. So you've got to imagine that this has, these are almost like, this is like your black hole in your galaxy, right? This is the accretion disk. And this around here is the little miniature versions of this whole little center of the universe. These are their own little solar systems going around here, okay? And so it's like a model for a galaxy in its own right, okay? So now the other thing, if I overlay this, is you'll notice this heart shape. This heart shape. Now, if you go back through O-Day presentations and other presentations, we saw the heart shape on unbelievable numbers of different systems. And given the fact that that was the focus of the sonofusion, then I believe that 100% conclusively, we can say that sonofusion has this structure at the core. It will also be in the core of every one of those little things flying out of the water in a Tibetan singing bowl with water in it. And so if you get a really good Tibetan singing bowl, then you will be likely creating these kind of structures in there. And that is just mind-boggling because, as I said before, with regard to the Tibetan singing bowl, it implies an implicit knowledge of the understanding of this technology, and that they were effectively energizing the water by doing that. They were cohering energy from the far field, as well as potentially it might have even been purifying the water. I don't know about that, but it would possibly and quite likely be structuring the water, energizing it, and even possibly, depending on how long you did it, it would actually be making the water more rich in bioavailable elements. It could even be making it what you might like to call holy water or holy water. That's my little joke for the evening. You're not going to believe this. When I show you this is going to be a watershed. It's a watershed in my life. I hope it's a watershed in your life. You will know 100% certainly that thousands of years, possibly, but certainly hundreds of years of lying has been going on. I suggest thousands of years, or incredible ignorance. Incredible ignorance. You just could not see it, okay? But I actually think that the evidence suggests that there's been a ridiculous effort to prevent this from being understood. And I'll give you an example. Whenever you get into low-energy nuclear reactions, or what was formerly misnamed cold fusion, coherent matter nuclear reactions, the effect of the fractal toroidal moment in my book, what people will say is, oh, that's nonsense. It's just, what, alchemy? They say, you believe in alchemy? I'm going to tell you today, yes, I do believe in alchemy. Yes, alchemy is real. You are going to know 100% that people that supposedly never had a computer, never had ability to do what I've just shown you on an SEM, you're going to know that they knew this and didn't know it slightly. They knew it utterly and completely and precisely. But Triton, who was in, maybe even in the link today, he sent me this image because it reminded him of the structure that I derived from experiment. And this was a ring, and it says Fulcanelli ring, believed to have been made with gold obtained by transmutation. I don't know if you can see that there. Okay? This is the Fulcanelli ring. Okay? sun, moon, triangle, thing that's offset to one side and centered, and a thing up here, the little cross, okay? And this is from 1922. Yes, 100, and it's 2222 here in the Czech Republic. I belong to a character called, it belonged to a character called Fulcanelli, a pseudonym. So his real name wasn't given, who was supposed to be a Templar that had achieved the great work, the Magnus Opus, and written some books. In an article about him, reference 8, it says, through the breadth of his work, by interpreting the decor of cathedrals from the esoteric and alchemical perspective, Fulcanelli not only shed a totally new light on medieval art, but he also created such emulation that the approach to esoteric science was radically changed. In the same article, it says the alchemist Julien Champagne, 1877 to 1932, who was the illustrator of the works of his master Fulcanelli, placed a coat of arms at the end of the book, The Mystery of the Cathedrals. I have overlaid, this as me talking, the sacred geometry on the coat of arms, and yes, I think he was an adept alchemist and had likely realized the great work, including establishing what the Philosopher's Stone was. There is no shadow of doubt in my mind that this coat of arms precisely shows the structure. Okay? No doubt in my mind. Hi, Triton. So thank you for sharing that. So here's Triton again, Triton Jaeger. Triton sent me a link because it resembled, sent me the link because it resembled both the sacred geometry structure I had established from experiments, but also because it looked a little like the Frank Palifka's wind hex. Indeed, it does. He also sent me another link that shows a similar graphic. So you've got, in this case, you have the sun on the left and the moon on the right. That's typically as it is in a Masonic lodge. And in this case, you have the sun on the right. That's Ra, the Egyptian symbol for the sun. And this is also, by the way, a ring and spot orthogonal to this plane. And this shows a wheel, in my view, within a wheel. And this is the out and the in. And it's interesting that in, electric current, they actually show the current coming towards you with a ring spot and a cross on the way back. But anyway, that's that. And here we have what I would argue is the disruption beam and the triangle going in. It's very highly stylized. And here's the 101 of the Masonic Order. Okay. And there we go. So this is, when you do reverse image search for this on Google, you immediately get Eye of Providence images and related material. On doing further research, I came across the images described below. So this image is De Calvinostis Metallurium Occultus S, qui lapis es venerabilis. Of the cave of the hidden metals, you are the venerable stone from Hermes. Frontispiece from the Hermetical Triumph or the Victorious Philosophical Stone, Anonymous 1740. So this is from 1740. That is nearly 300 years ago. And look what we see. I decided to compare it to some experiments in sacred geometry as well as the wind hex. Here is the result. So there's your flow pattern. There's the sacred geometry structure. I had to, this is an normal orientation, but for some samples I have to flip it, just like the ring is flipped from the imagery in the other one. So down here you have basically ether, the spirit. It comes up. You have the destruction zone, just like you do on Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower if you move the electrode down too far. And you have very specific areas up here, very carefully defined by this overall structure. You have the crown here, you have the triangle, you have this cross beam line here. Now, just to say, look, I'm not saying the Masons have been hiding something. I say, at the very least, what we can know for certain is that they've been trying to tell everyone whether they knew it themselves. So this is, as I've shown you before, the Masonic Lodge in Brighton. And every single thing about it is nearly perfect. The only thing I'll say is that if you were to have the Sothic triangle not go to the center here, but move up, then if it was then extended out, firstly, it would be a little bit further over at this point, and it would extend out to the bottom of the door. Okay, bear that in mind when I'm going to show you what I'm going to show you. But down here, you can see the Vajra on a coin 234 before Christ. Okay, 234 before Christ, and this is a Vajra. I've shown other Macedonian and coins with the Thunderbolt on there and the Chiro, and the other type that they have on there is the Caduceus, or very common symbols. The Thunderbolt, or the part of the Thunderbolt. But almost all of these important symbols that you see on coinage for thousands of years are representations of ball lightning. Now, I showed you in 1733. So here we go, 1740. In 1733, we have this Masonic Lodge here. I don't know whether that's the name of the street, but it had to have 33 in it, didn't it? I mean, it just had to have 33. So I don't know whether that's the name of the street. But anyway, in there we have the sacred geometry with one rotation of sacred geometry from the top down structures, or what we might like to call auspicious symbol. And that's the sun on one side, and here we have the moon on the other. And together they make an overall structure with your beams coming out. And Ordo ab Chao. And I described that in this presentation here. You know, close to that, if we actually go and turn on the sacred geometry, which I now have in color, you can see that the overall field of influence here to the non-radiating boundary is in excess of 100 microns. The bit that typically leaves a mark is in this area here, which you might argue is around about, let's say, 80 microns. Okay, there is some smaller level of influence out to the side of the apple. Okay, now whatever made this overall apple has long gone, but the first substructure moved up here and crashed on the surface. And do I actually have that? I don't know whether I have that. I don't have that. Where's that one? Did I put that? Oh, yes. Okay. So we can see it here. And are you ready for this? Are you ready for it? I could not believe it when I saw this. I thought, you are beep kidding me. You are beep kidding me. 3, 2, 1. Boom! What do you see? What do you see? Anyone got it? Yeah, ovaries good, face, yes, of course. But what do you see? Okay, all right, no one's going to get it. Okay, all right. Yes, yes, Laura, you get the prize. The Caduceus is in there. You've got the line sword going through the middle, which we've already identified, and we've already seen this in a Henk-Uren impact on a fused quartz, and you've got the Caduceus here. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it goes down to the right level. Look, when I overlay the sacred geometry, it goes back down to exactly where it should do. Okay? Right the way up to the center. It's just Mind-boggling. From the 15th century. Look at it. From the 15th century. There it is. There's your caduceus. This is not guesswork. These guys were not guessing. They knew. How did they know? There it is. You got the sword coming down and you got the caduceus. And so basically what you have is this overall structure with obviously, and actually if you go in and it is going to be like this. People can have an opinion, they can have a view, but when you're going to look at these samples, they are going to show this, exactly this, and nothing but this. It is the only thing that the universe can do, and it's the thing that it can do the most powerful things, the most easiest, with the least effort. This is working with nature in the truest sense. You're working with the program that, in my view, underpins the whole of nature. There is nothing easier to achieve anything. If you make a device that doesn't employ this geometry to do anything well, it's going to be doing it in a difficult way. You cannot invent this, you cannot own it. It is a fact of nature. So if we overlay the sacred geometry here again, you'll note that the boundary here is the boundary of the apple. This is sunk in. Now I imagine for whatever reason this kind of came in here, but you can see the boundary here is the apple. So you can see here the caduceus comes down to the boundary between the Sothic triangle and the Vesica Pisces. And essentially that is this area, Sothic triangle, Vesica Pisces. So it comes down to here, and that's basically where it stops. It stops there on this structure as well. This is totally, totally perfect understanding. I will overlay, for the sake of argument, the actual geometry here from the Hermes reference, the 1700s document. There you have it. So again, the boundary where that lies here what am I doing? This one. Now, this is heavier elements. Why do we know that? Because it has iron pieces in it. Okay? The feedstock is copper, oxygen, and water. And over here in the center, we get magnesium, we get carbon around the outside. Therefore, I would suggest this might be the Yang force. And the reason it does not explode, and the Yang force is represented by the sun. It's glowing. It's emitting stuff. Okay? Yeah? The Yang force doesn't explode because it's disassembling matter and then shedding the smaller things. Okay? It's pulling matter in and it's shedding it. And it's giving it over to the Yin. And the Yin explodes when it's finished, because it has matter that's been pushed in there and it is synthesizing heavier and heavier matter. But when the confinement fails, it spits out the abundance of matter. Now, if you remember in the previous presentation, we had these tori, these apples, crashed into the landscape of the copper oxide. And some of them broke and they spewed out all of these synthesized elements, predominantly carbon and oxygen, but spewing out these elements. And that implies to me, because we've also seen this on the work of Matsumoto. And if you go to, let's say, pages, and it comes out of the poll in my view. If you go to pages 254, 255, 256, etc., you have these examples here of a sphere and stuff spewing out of one point, okay? Spewing out here, and he identified this as mostly carbon. And here, this is a lead ball, and out of the lead ball, you've got this spewing of mostly carbon, okay? We replicated this in a Marsa gas on indium, and it looked like a volcano. And if you look in Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse, he actually describes a volcano as being based on this process, and I'm not surprised why. So if you remember, we saw it there. We also saw it on an iron-rich crenellated sphere, carbon spewing out, and eventually elements like titanium, which we saw in this sample. We saw some titanium over here, okay? We saw titanium coming out, but we also saw the range of typical elements that come out of these systems. And we also saw it here in Binjuen's Huang's system. Now, if all of these elements are packed into the yin and they're being crushed, electromagnetic and gravitational, the unification of the forces, they're being crushed such that they're becoming coherent and able to occupy the same space, i.e. they become bosonic, right? So the boson can occupy the same space-time. The thing is acting a bit like a TARDIS. It's the only way you can think about it. It's either crushing it so that the atoms are physically smaller and electrons become degenerate and whatever, and it's getting smaller. There's only two options. One, phenomenal gravity. Phenomenal gravity caused by electric magnetic processes, leading to electronuclear collapse. Or they're bosonic and it's a coherent cluster and the matter is going in there, or it's a combination of both. But you can't have lots more matter stored in something unless one of those two or that kind of thing is going on. And when the atoms return to our ordinary Pauli exclusion principle, electrons involved, ordinary baryonic matter and atoms, it has to spew out because it cannot be contained anymore by the electromagnetic structure and potentially, you know, toroidal moment structure that is confining it into that phase singularity, that point, okay? It's not strictly a point of no dimension. We can see at each quantized level, they actually have a dimension, yeah? But it's confined in there, and then it bursts forth. And so I think that what you're seeing in here is very specifically the reason that this does not explode on this side, this one here, on this side, the reason this does not explode is that this is the yang force, okay? And the reason that this does explode and has iron in it, heavier element, is this is the yin force. And it has to give birth to the new elements. It has to give birth to the new elements. It literally has to open itself up. It has to open itself up, like Arara Konsergin's artwork here. It literally has to open itself up and give birth to the new elements. This is the flower of life. This is the beauty of the female person. That is what's going on there, in my view. This is nature. This is literally like a living organism. This is literally like a living organism. The fact that this object, which is the internals of a much larger fractal cluster, collided with the surface and left one half of it and all of its internals here, and then skipped and left the other bit here for us to find and to realize that this is the sacred geometry. It is there. And that it is the sacred geometry. And it is there. and it has the caduceus and everything. And they didn't just know, you know, this is the center line, this is where I traditionally have the Sothic triangle. I've put in here where I think it is from the data, and wouldn't you know it, that is where it is from the data, and here is the bottom of the crown. Absolutely perfect. And if you actually look at this, and I bring up the original image, this one? No. Yeah, this one. It's so surreal. Because look what they have here. They literally have the crown. It's there. That is the crown. It's an odd-shaped crown. How did they know? Here is the crown. Here's your carbon coming down here, and it's going up there, and you've got the crown here. It's even got this arch, and this arch. This arch, that bit with the Maltese cross, of course it would have the Maltese cross there, and the bit coming down here. How did they know? So that at least the outside edge of the Sothic triangle comes to here, okay? And then you can see how it better aligns with the overall impacted material here. Okay? And I think that's probably why the Ankh has an angle on it, if you look at the more ancient Ankhs rather than at a side. And I think that's also why the human form actually has this point here. You can't see me. This point here. And the eyes coming down from that. So anyway, the level of knowledge that these people had spanning many hundreds of years. And so this really is telling the story. It's really telling the story. And have I got, yeah, basically your etheric matter. Your matter is torn apart like it is in the wind hex. The destruction zone here at the top of this etheric matter bowl. And it gets forced up here, it goes into this vortex. It gets fed into one side where it drives a deconstruction process, and the etheric matter gets fed into the other side. And you could maybe consider that it's two types of magnetic charges, or it's two types, whatever. Whatever's coming in here, and this is assembling matter, and this is coming in here, and it's disassembling matter. Absolutely mind-boggling. Right. I've got Fulcanelli's ring on there as well, so you can see it in situ. There we go. Fulcanelli's ring. Now, we are looking at incredible technologies. Malcolm's technology, it's a prototype. The evidence is getting stronger that it is doing this. It's definitely got it in there. 100%. You get the iron-rich crenellated microspheres, you've got the ring spots, and you've got the hexagonal carbon deposits with their spatial arrangement. 100% it is in the counter vortex tube, certainly on the inside, the outside, and the outside of the inside. So 100% it's doing that, and it becomes a matter of optimizing it and you know, delivering it. Bin Zhuanhuang's 100% is doing transmutation. Absolutely, categorically is doing it. You have in this data set and the other data set I shared with you on Sunday, total, conclusive, undeniable, categorical proof that alchemy is real, that it's very simple, and that it's been literally in all ancient architecture, medieval architecture, and in our own form all of our lives. The greatest deception that has ever been conducted on the human species. Or very, very stupid people in authority. Or academic institutions. I don't believe they're stupid. I don't believe they're malicious. As I said at the time, so many people in 2017, so many people have died needlessly. So many people go hungry needlessly. But I believed that either they were signed in or bound in some legal contract or spiritual contract even, where they couldn't share this, or they genuinely thought they were doing us all a favor by keeping it hidden, right? But we're at a point now where we are digging up vast quantities of the landscape and now going into our oceans to find things like iridium and cobalt and in inhumane conditions. And honestly, if I'm now pretty of the firm belief that if you get the right starting elements, you build to the right fractal quantization level with the right resonance, and you bake for the right amount of time, nature will precisely produce a spread of elements from the starting material, the level of resonance aggregation, and the closing down time. And then you will need chemistry to separate out the resulting elements. Okay? But it's quite a lot if you have an industrial process that precisely starts with chemicals. It puts it through a defined thermal and vibrational, and obviously thermal is vibrational, regime, and it stops the process at the right time, and then you break up the material and you end up with stuff that you chemically extract. And I'm probably of the mind that if Egypt didn't have all of the gold it was using to buy spices and to control a large proportion of land, it may have actually been synthesizing. It may have been synthesizing, and it may be that the Great Pyramid was the key to the whole shebang. It has other purposes which I've discussed and other purposes that I will discuss in my view. It is because it is this technology that has so many different uses. But it will be a key component in possibly an alchemical plant. It's unique, but a key component in that alchemical plant that might be providing a resource that is able to better allow the production of these different elements. And it might be that the Philosopher's Stone itself is matter that is replete with these monopole structures that are latent in the material. And then you add that to new material, and it's like micro machines. You energize them, they go in, they take in the ingredients, they work them for a little bit of time, and then you chemically remove the synthesized elements. Okay? You take a portion of that material that you've used, and it's literally like the seed for creating new of that those elements, right? And it might be that the Philosopher's Stone was the sort of like the initiator. It's like the catalyst, but it's a catalyst in that it is literally a micro machine, and it is perfect. It's just perfect, and it makes itself, and it's perfect in the same way that your face is. Your face is perfect. We are literally a miracle of creation. We are an expression of this phenomena. Oh God, wow, guys, thanks. Ode. The great work. If you want to know what the Arabic there is al-khamaya. It's alchemy in Arabic. And what you're seeing on the screen is very, very like the uterus. Why would it not be? And we know that on one side, we have the yang force breaking matter apart and gifting it over to the yin that is synthesizing matter, and then as part of its process, it gives birth to new matter. It is a beautiful gift of nature. It is nature.
So what does this mean? If you can't see it yet, and I understand that sometimes it's just not that easy, this is information that can be totally overwhelming. It means that we are getting very close to the rediscovery of the holy grail of science, if this is not it itself, the deepest secret of the physical reality which we currently call home. This is what I've been talking about in my previous videos when I speak abstractly of the music of the spheres. There's a perfect geometric harmony occurring throughout all natural space-time events. This is the geometry of life, and life begins with the fractal toroidal moment. All life begins with the Vesica Piscis, the womb of creation, of geometry, and of sound. And this latter point relating to the Vesica Piscis and sound and music is something that I've also been working to visually demonstrate in a book that I hope to publish this year. I might have it ready for Cosmic Summit, which you'll be able to catch all of us there. Check out the link in the description for tickets, get them soon. So we once knew all of this. Our ancestors well understood the invisible world in terms of geometry and sound, and this is evident beyond a doubt. They were capable of feats of architecture and engineering that we may say we could replicate now, but we cannot. And we never will if we continue on with our current understanding of how technology works. All binary, quantum, particle, wave-based understandings. The machine is alive. All of its parts are alive. The universal form of God, one of his aspects, is an intelligent machine. It follows objective rules. It follows the same processes on all scales of the fractal. And we can read this story from start to finish through the medium of geometry. Welcome to the return of alchemy to the modern world. The return of old knowledge, knowledge of the spirit and of the invisible world, as well as of time, space, and of matter. All along, this knowledge has been hidden in plain sight, just like so many people have speculated throughout history, right or wrong, in the specifics of their ideas. The evidence is encoded everywhere around us, in our face, in the plants and trees, birds and rocks and beehives, and the geometrical structures of elements, molecules, and all living manifestations and reactions. In the thousands of books, stories, myths, paintings, temples, cathedrals, statues, and records left by the alchemists, philosophers, and the scientists of ancient Egypt, Greece, India, China, and other previously advanced civilizations. There are many. The world is about to change. Science is about to change, and the choice is all yours as to whether you would like to come along for the ride cheering or resist it and get dragged along by the power of the vortex. Bob Greenyer has identified the signature of one of the fundamental acts of creation. It doesn't just show that ball lightning is occurring in these reactors. Stepwise transmutation follows a defined process of synthesis and leaves objective signatures. It shows something much bigger, true alchemy, how life itself works, geometry and sound, my friends. Welcome to Alchemical Science. I'm Jordan. You have Bob Greenyer, Malcolm Bendel, Dr. Bin Juan Huang, the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, and about 1,000 others to thanks for this update. But particularly here, Mr. Bob Greenyer. He's revealed something profound this week, and I hope you will all share your wholehearted congratulations with Bob in the comments or over on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project channel and share this video far and wide. It's not over yet, guys. It's pretty much certain at this point that you will see some mass-produced form of this technology soon. Very, very likely the Thunderstorm generator, which is already going through the motions to be commercialized, and this is only getting more and more serious by the day. The information, however, needs to be shared now. Bob is putting his career, his credibility, his life on the line to do the work he does. We need him, and he needs your support. So share the video, tell people about it. Back it up to your computer. Take a clip of it, share it on another platform, directing back to my video here, or Bob's video over on MFMP. Make your own video. Reach out to Bob to see how you can help the project or get a sample from the reactors to conduct your own peer review. Whoever you are, whatever you can do, just help us get this out there. We're so close. Give Bob time to gain more data. Give Malcolm time to ensure this never gets shut down again. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There is hundreds more hours of this over on MFMP, and even hours more just on these recent results. Lots more that I haven't covered. Get on it, and there's going to be so many more videos coming from me and starting to link a lot of this stuff together. This is a really exciting time. Thanks for considering this video. This is the end of the beginning.